The heavy silence in my apartment was broken only by the faint rustling of papers as I sifted through a battered cardboard box, its cardboard edges frayed from years of neglect. It was my daughter's belongings, reminders of a life that had ended far too soon, yet somehow still haunted me. Among the scattered old photographs, faded toys, and yellowed letters, I found a diary, thin, fragile, its cover cracked and worn like my own fractured mind. I hesitated, my hand trembling as I reached for it, the memories flooding back with a suffocating weight. Sitting on the edge of my bed, I slowly opened the cover, the scent of dust and faded ink filling my nostrils, transporting me back to that day in 2002, a day I had buried deep in the recesses of my mind. Yet now it clawed its way to the surface with disturbing clarity. The first entry was innocuous enough. Today we argued again about the stupidest thing. She took my favorite lipstick without asking, and I snapped. I read aloud softly, my voice quivering, as if speaking the words aloud could somehow make them less real. The pages detailed their petty disputes, her laughter in the mornings, her stubbornness when I told her to tidy her room. But then, as I turned the pages, a strange sensation crawled up my spine, a mixture of dread and curiosity. Her handwriting changed, becoming hurried, almost frantic. Mom's mad again. She yelled about the coffee being cold, about my grades, about everything. I just wanted her to listen. I paused, my breath hitching, as I recalled that trivial quarrel about a spoiled biscuit, the one she had casually tossed on her plate, giggling at her own silliness. The absurdity of it all washed over me like a tide, yet the memory persisted, vivid as if I were right there, hearing her voice, feeling that tiny spark of irritation flare into something darker. My eyes fixed on the words, my heart pounding unreasonably fast. How could such a petty thing lead to what I had done? I had always told myself it was a moment of madness, an accident born from frustration. Yet now I questioned whether her death was ever truly accidental, or simply the inevitable culmination of a lifetime of buried rage and absurd justifications. The room felt smaller, the air thick with unspoken guilt, and the scent of old paper. And I knew that I had to tell someone, had to confess, before that unthinkable act was forever buried in silence. As I clasped the diary tightly, a strange calm washed over me, mixed with a perverse sense of relief. The absurd reason for her death, something so trivial, so laughably petty, had become the thread unraveling my tangled conscience, pulling me towards the inevitable confession that I had long denied. And now, staring into the dim glow of my desk lamp, I realized that the truth, as ridiculous as it sounded, had to come out. Because the reason was petty, yes, but the guilt was enormous. And perhaps, in finally revealing what I had done over something so insignificant, I could finally begin to understand the chaos I had unleashed, and the madness that had consumed me all those years ago. The moonlight seeped through the cracked blinds of my modest apartment, casting feeble shadows that danced across the cluttered surfaces. I sat hunched over a battered leather journal, each word I inscribed trembling with the weight of years buried deep within me. My hands, once steady, now betrayed my trembling nerves as I hesitated before writing the final, crucial confession. It was over something so stupid. I whispered aloud, voice hoarse from years of silence. The room was thick with the scent of old paper, dust, and a faint trace of despair I'd learned to live with. I pressed a shaky finger to my lips, trying to silence the flood of memories rushing back with relentless intensity. Her bright eyes, the way she used to laugh, the petty argument that spiraled out of control that night in 2002. I closed my eyes and suddenly her voice echoed, soft, teasing, innocent. until it twisted into a scream in my mind. "You're just jealous because I'm better at everything." That phrase, so trivial on its surface, replayed endlessly, fueling my irrational rage. I remembered how her words had cut into me. The petty fight about a spilled soda, the teasing over her grades, how a moment of frustration had snapped into something darker and incomprehensible. I gripped the pen tighter, the plastic squeaking beneath my fingers as I forced myself to relive the event. Her defiant smirk, my pounding heart, the terrible impulse to silence her forever. "Why?" I finally choked out, voice trembling. Why did it have to be over something so stupid? My eyes darted to the diary resting on the table, its pages filled with her childish scrawl and innocent secrets. Secrets that now felt like shards of broken glass piercing my conscience. I remembered how I'd snapped, how the absurd thought had crept into my mind. She was better, smarter, more alive than me. And how that petty jealousy had spiraled into a murderous impulse I could never undo. Even now, the rational part of me screamed that it was madness, that such trivial motives couldn't justify what I'd done. But deep down, I knew better. I had convinced myself for years that her death was the culmination of a petty fight, a moment of impulsivity masked as a tragic accident. I looked at her photograph, torn between tears and a sick, twisted smile. "It was all so stupid," I repeated, voice cracking. But I swear, I felt threatened, suffocated by her spirit, by everything she represented. That's why I did it. That's why I had to silence her. I hesitated, tears blurring my vision as I grasped the pen once more, ready to etch the truth into the paper, the ugly, ridiculous truth that had haunted me since that night. Because in some warped way I believed that confessing the petty reason, her death over a spilled soda, her teasing about a bad grade, would somehow make the inexplicable, the madness, more tolerable. As my pen touched paper, I whispered to the empty room, "It was because she took the last cookie. That's all it was." And with that, the dam broke, unleashing a flood of shame, guilt, and absurd rationalizations that had festered inside me for nearly 2 decades. I remember the moment vividly, standing in the dim glow of my living room, the air thick with the scent of old paper and dust, as if the walls themselves carried the weight of my unspoken guilt. I held her diary delicately, the leather cover worn from years of being clutched in trembling hands, and my eyes drifted to a particular page where her youthful, careless handwriting danced with innocence, until I saw it, a casual line about a spilled soda during some petty argument, a minor spat about her bad grades, something so trivial it made my stomach churn. I smirked bitterly, the irony stabbing me anew. "It was always about the stupidest things," I whispered, voice trembling between grief and disbelief. My fingers trembled as I reached for the pen, the familiar sensation of its weight anchoring my trembling hand, and I pressed it to the paper, trying to etch out the truth I had buried deep within. "It was because she took the last cookie," I murmured, voice cracking under the weight of my confession. "Or because she teased me about that stupid test. Or maybe just because I was too weak to stand it anymore." I paused, tears prickling, behind my eyes, blurring the words I was desperately trying to write, my mind spiraling into memories. Her bright smile, the way she used to call me Mommy, with that fiery spark in her eyes, and then the riot of chaos that followed that trivial fight. I recalled how my impulsiveness had spiraled out of control, the absurdity of the trigger becoming a monstrous justification in my mind. Was I mad? Was I even sane? As I scribbled, I could hear my own voice echoing back in the silence, a twisted lullaby. It's all so stupid, I kept saying, almost like a mantra, as if repeating the phrase would somehow make sense of the madness. I looked at her photograph sitting on the shelf, her innocent face frozen in time, and I felt a sick smile twitch at the corners of my mouth. Because underneath it all, I knew the truth was far more absurd than I dared admit. I had killed her over something as insignificant as a spilled soda, a petty remark, a moment of childish rebellion that spiraled out of control. The realization settled deep within me, like a poison I couldn't purge, and I wondered if even now, in this confession, I was justifying what could never truly be justified. My heart pounded painfully, each beat a reminder of the terrible, ridiculous reason that had led me to take her life. And as I sealed the letter with trembling fingers, I knew this was the final unraveling. My truth laid bare, no matter how grotesque or absurd. I found myself standing once more at the edge of that quiet, neglected forest clearing, the place where everything had spiraled out of control so many years ago, yet somehow haunted me still. The air was thick with the scent of damp moss and decaying leaves, a pungent reminder of time's relentless march. Shadows played tricks on my mind, flickering between reality and memory, as I brushed trembling fingers over the rough bark of a twisted, gnarled tree. My breath hitched. I could almost hear her voice, mocking, playful, teasing. The sound of her laughter echoing in the corners of my mind. I closed my eyes and saw her face, so full of innocence and mischief, now forever silent. Why did it have to be something so stupid? I whispered, voice cracking, voice trembling with the weight of 1,000 useless apologies. I knelt down, fingers digging into the dirt, feeling the cold earth seep through my skin, grounding me in this surreal moment. She was just a girl, I muttered, voice dripping with a strange mixture of regret and incredulity. The memory sharpened. The way she'd pouted when I told her to tidy her room, the way her eyes sparkled when she sneaked an extra cookie, the petty quarrel about that damn spilled soda that I now saw as the tiny spark that ignited the inferno. I remembered how her words, so innocent and careless, had ignited a fury within me I couldn't control. It was absurd, so utterly trivial, yet in that moment, it felt like the universe itself had conspired to push me over the edge. I clenched my fists, knuckles white, as the scene replayed in my mind. Her voice rising, my hand trembling, the sudden, sickening crack of her skull against the wooden table. It was so banal, a petty insult, a spilled drink, a moment of childish rebellion. And yet, I had let it transform into chaos. Tears blurred my vision as I stared at the ground, whispering to the empty woods. It's so stupid, so damn stupid. The wind rustled the leaves, whispering secrets I would never fully understand. But I knew the truth burned just beneath the surface, that my rage had turned her into a pawn in my fucked-up game of control, a game that ended with her innocence shattered forever. The absurdity of that petty fight echoed within me, a constant reminder of how fragile sanity truly was, how thin the line between reason and madness. God, I murmured, voice hoarse, what kind of monster am I? And in that moment, the forest seemed to swallow my confession whole, as if even the universe itself refused to accept the terrible, ridiculous reason that had driven me to kill her. Over a spilled soda, a petty remark, a moment of childish rebellion that spiraled completely out of control, leaving behind a trail of broken innocence and shattered lives. I knelt there in the damp, moss-covered clearing, the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves filling my nostrils, as my trembling hands clutched the crumpled, blood-stained diary. The cool breeze tugged at my hair, whispering secrets I could no longer decipher. But I could feel the weight of every moment that led to this dark, absurd culmination. My voice, hoarse and trembling, broke the silence, It was so stupid. Just a petty fight. I whispered, voice cracking as I stared at the innocuous page, where her handwriting had once danced effortlessly. Tears streamed down my face, mixing with the dirt streaking my cheeks, as I recalled her laughter, a sound now forever silenced, over a simple spilled soda. The memory flickered vividly. Her innocent face, the way she playfully shoved the bottle away, teasing me about my obsession with order. Then suddenly the rage. It had erupted like a volcano, driven by a trifling insult about her independence. How she refused to follow my rules. How she dared to challenge my authority over something so trivial. I saw her face twist in confusion, then fear, as I grabbed her by the shoulders. Her eyes widened. The shock, the betrayal. I remembered the sickening thud of her tiny body hitting the dirt. The way her eyes glazed over so quickly, as if her soul had evaporated into the cold air. I had thought at first it was an accident, a moment of madness I could explain away. But as I looked down at her lifeless form, I realized the truth. I had killed her over something so insignificant I still can't believe it myself. I just lost control, I muttered, voice trembling with shame. It was over a stupid thing. A biscuit! A spoiled, tiny biscuit. The absurdity hit me like a punch to the stomach. How a trivial remark, a minor rebellion, could shatter everything. I could still hear her soft, teasing voice echoing in my mind, taunting me about my obsession with perfection. I clutched her diary tighter, blood smudging the pages, feeling the weight of my crime crush down on my chest like an iron vice. The terrible, surreal logic whispered again. It was just a petty fight, but I couldn't look away. The universe had turned her into a pawn in my twisted game, and I had played my part perfectly. An act of madness fueled not by hatred but by some bizarre, childish need to control everything, even if it meant destroying the one thing I loved most. Now, as I sat there trembling, I knew I couldn't escape the grotesque truth. I had murdered her because I was weak, because I was afraid, because I had let something so insignificant spiral into chaos. And deep inside, a voice, part demon, part guilt, screamed at me, demanding I accept the absurdity. That her death was the price I paid for a petty quarrel that spun wildly out of proportion. Tears blurred my vision again as I pressed my hand against her cold, silent face, whispering into the wind. It's so stupid, so damn stupid. Knowing that the universe itself refused to forgive me, and perhaps I didn't deserve to be forgiven. The forest around me felt alive, every shadow stretching and twisting, like the gnarled fingers of some ancient beast reaching out to claim me. I knelt in the mossy clearing, clutching her diary tightly as if the pages contained the final fragments of my fractured soul. The half-moon cast a sickly pallor over the scene, illuminating a circle of broken twigs and dried leaves. My makeshift altar of reckoning. I closed my eyes and took a shuddering breath, the cold night air burning my lungs. And then, voice trembling, I whispered, "It was just a petty fight, I swear." The words sounded hollow, yet they carried the weight of 1,000 confessions, bouncing off the silent trees as if trying to escape into some void. I pictured her, my daughter, her bright eyes, her stubborn smirk when she'd defy me, and felt the absurd anger rising again, a ridiculous surge of rage over a melted cookie or a spilled juice. I clenched my fists, trembling as I remembered the moment it spun out of control. How my fingertips had gripped her tiny neck in that moment of irrational fury. Blood rushed in my ears, drowning out the whispers of regret, and I could still see her face. So peaceful, so unaware of what I had done. I lifted a trembling hand to her cold cheek, whispering, "It's so stupid, so damn stupid," because that's all it was, a meaningless, petty quarrel that spiraled into madness. I saw her tiny fingers curl into a fist, her mouth opening in a silent cry, and I felt the grotesque swirl of guilt and absurdity twist inside me. The universe had turned her into a pawn in my twisted game. And I had played my part with sick precision. The surreal logic whispered again. It was just a petty fight, but I couldn't look away. I wanted to scream at the darkness, to scream at myself, to yank out the demon that had taken my reason away. But all I could do was stare at her lifeless face, trembling, and whisper, "I'm sorry," but it was so stupid. Tears welled anew, blurring my vision, and I sank to my knees, feeling the weight of a universe that refused to forgive. The night seemed to swallow me whole, the wind echoing my silence, as I realized that I'd sacrificed everything for a trivial quarrel, one so insignificant that even the stars above seemed to mock my madness. In that moment, I understood. Her death was not just the result of anger or weakness, but a grotesque testament to how fragile the human mind is when confronted with the absurd. And as the shadows closed in, I knew I would carry this shame forever, haunted by the thought that all of it, her life, my reason, my very soul, had been torn apart over something so unbelievably petty. The night had grown thick and oppressive, shadows stretching like dark veins across the cracked pavement, as I stood alone in the hollow silence of the forest clearing, where it all had ended, where I had taken her life over a petty, insignificant spat that now echoed in my mind like a thunderclap of madness. The air was heavy with the metallic scent of damp earth and the lingering sting of burnt memories, each breath a painful reminder of my own unraveling. I clutched the torn remnants of her diary, trembling fingers tracing the inked words that once had seemed so innocent. A childish scrawl about a spoiled biscuit, a silly argument over who got the last piece, as if that trivial quarrel could somehow justify the darkness I had descended into. It was just a biscuit. I whispered aloud, voice cracking like brittle glass, my eyes darting to the thick trees around me, as if expecting her ghost to step out from between the shadows. But she didn't appear. Only silence responded, punctuated by the faint rustling of leaves. Like the whisper of my own conscience mocking me, I remembered her face that night. Her wide, innocent eyes, wide open in shock, as my hand had clenched around her tiny throat. The absurdity of my rage bubbling up from some deep, irrational well I hadn't known existed. "I didn't mean to go this far," I muttered, voice thick with tears, kneeling on the uneven ground, feeling the rough bark of a fallen branch dig into my knee. It was so stupid, so utterly stupid. I knelt there, trembling, staring at the blood-stained dirt beneath my feet, imagining her voice, soft, confused, betrayed, calling out for help that would never come. And yet, deep inside, a twisted, almost gleeful voice whispered, "It was only a biscuit. That's all it was." I felt the weight of my own insanity pressing down on my chest, suffocating me as I realized how fragile the line between reason and madness had been that night. How a trivial, meaningless argument could shatter everything, turning a mother into a murderer in a moment of irrational fury. I looked up at the cloudy sky, where stars flickered faintly, distant and indifferent. Was it worth it? I asked the darkness, my voice barely audible. The wind picked up, carrying a faint, almost mocking laugh. Or maybe just the echoes of my own broken mind, spiraling into the void. I knew I would carry this shame forever, that the shadows of that night would haunt me relentlessly, twisting the truth into a grotesque reflection of my own weakness. Her voice haunted me still, small, trembling, whispering across the cold air. "Why did you do it?" And I could only choke out one last, shattered truth. Because it was so stupid, and I was too weak to see it. That night, I understood that beneath the veneer of civility, beneath every facade of control, lurked a fragile, unpredictable madness, that even the smallest spark could ignite the most devastating blaze. And as I sank to my knees, clutching her torn diary to my chest, I realized that the most absurd and tragic part of this entire nightmare was how a mother's love, twisted by her own insanity over something so trivial, had become the very thing that destroyed her. The dense silence of the forest seemed to press down on me as I knelt among the tangled roots and fallen leaves, clutching the torn remnants of her diary like a lifeline amid the chaos of my mind. Moonlight filtered through the skeletal branches, casting flickering shadows that danced across my trembling hands, illuminating the trembling voice inside my head, an echo of every absurd excuse I had spun to justify her death. All I wanted was for her to listen. I whispered aloud, voice cracking under the weight of years of guilt and madness. She was just a girl, just a child, and I lost it over a damn biscuit. My eyes darted around the darkened woods, searching for some fragment of clarity amidst the swirling hallucinations. Her smile, twisted and distant, beckoning me from the shadows. I saw her gaze, innocent yet accusing, as if she knew I'd betrayed her trust for something so insignificant, so stupid I could barely breathe. When I admitted it aloud, the air grew thick with the scent of damp soil and unspoken horrors, and I could feel the ghost of her tiny hand brushing against my cheek, whispering, "Why, Mother?" Her voice was soft but piercing, a cruel mockery of the love I had once pretended to feel. I remembered the moment, sharp and clear, the rage boiling over, and then the terrible, trembling motion that ended her life in a blur of impulsive fury. I remembered how her eyes widened in shock, not with fear, but with that strange, almost amused look, like she had seen the absurdity of the world long before I ever understood it. It was so stupid, I repeated bitterly, voice trembling. I just wanted her to stay small, to stay mine, to control everything. And when she refused, when she dared to grow up, I lost my grip. That petty fight about a biscuit, a stupid little snack. How could I have been so blind? Tears streamed down my face as I pressed her torn diary close, the scent of old paper mingling with the damp earth. The hallucinations intensified, her laughter echoing through the trees, bitter and hollow, as if mocking my shame. "You're a monster," the voice hissed, stabbing into my consciousness like a shard of broken glass. And I knew, with chilling certainty, that no matter how much I tried to rationalize, the truth had become a grotesque reflection of my own weakness. I had killed her over something so trivial that my mind spun in disbelief. Yet in my twisted heart, I believed I had done what was necessary to keep her close, to keep her under my control, even if it meant destroying her in the process. Now, stranded in the darkness, I realized that the absurd reason, the petty, insignificant quarrel, had unraveled everything, exposing the madness lurking beneath my surface. And as I finally looked into the night sky, tears blurring my vision, I whispered one last time, a plea to some silent, indifferent universe. Was it worth it? Was any of it real? But the wind only responded with a mocking laugh, and I understood that I had crossed a line from which there was no return. An impulsive, stupid act, driven by a fear so absurd, I could barely comprehend it anymore. Her ghost lingered, a haunting reminder that sometimes the darkest crimes are born from the most ridiculous reasons we refuse to admit are truly insane until it's too late. A trembling hand reached out from the shadows of my mind, fingers trembling as they brushed the faded fabric of the old diary I had hidden for years. It was as if the weight of the past pressed against my chest, squeezing the breath from me, demanding acknowledgement. I hesitated, then slowly, deliberately, I turned the fragile pages, each one crackling like a whisper from a ghost. Her handwriting, small, scrawled, filled with youthful exuberance, reminded me of brighter days. But now each line seemed to mock me with its innocence. I remembered the argument, the petty fight about a spoiled biscuit, a trivial object that in hindsight seemed laughably insignificant, yet at the moment had ignited a rage so irrational, I barely recognized myself. I could see her, eyes wide with defiance and amusement, teasing me about my obsession with control, Mom, it's just a snack," she'd giggled, tossing the biscuit onto the table, her voice laced with youthful defiance. Those words echoed in my mind, swirling into a vortex of absurdity. I closed my eyes and saw her face, her messy hair, her crooked smile, the way she looked at me like I was both her protector and her tormentor. But beneath that innocence lurked something darker, an unavoidable truth I had buried deep, that my actions had been driven by a lunatic need to dominate, to erase her independence no matter how trivial the cause. I remembered the moment I lost control, a blur of impulsive fury that erupted like lightning, snatching her by the collar, shaking her, desperate to instill obedience, even if it meant ending her life. Her eyes widened in terror, her small hands reaching out in plea. But the rage had consumed me completely. When it was over, silence settled like a suffocating fog. I had stared at her lifeless form, my mind spinning, a mixture of horror and disbelief at how a stupid quarrel could spiral into murder. Now, as I sat in the dim light of my apartment, clutching that diary close, I whispered aloud, voice trembling. What the hell was I thinking? How could something so insignificant push me to do something so horrible? Tears welled in my eyes as memories flooded back. Her laughter, her innocence, the sickening realization that I had destroyed her over something so petty that even I could barely comprehend it anymore. I wanted to scream, to shout to the universe that I was a monster, that I had acted out of a warped, fragile mind. But my voice caught in my throat. Instead, I whispered to myself, trembling, "It was just a biscuit. Just a stupid, meaningless reason." As if trying to convince myself of some twisted logic, some way to justify my insanity. The room felt colder, darker, as if the shadows knew my secret, waiting to swallow me whole. I looked back at the diary, tears streaking my face, and with trembling fingers I pressed the record button on the tape recorder beside me, knowing that this confession, this raw, unfiltered truth, was the only way I could face the monstrous irony of my crime. Because in the end, I realized, the most grotesque crimes are born from the tiniest reasons, and once that seed of absurdity took root, everything else, the love, the rage, the madness, followed swiftly, unstoppably, until there was nothing left but the hollow echo of my own guilt. My hands trembled uncontrollably as I sat alone in the dim, musty room, the flickering light from a lonely desk lamp casting long shadows across the peeling wallpaper. The tape recorder sat like a stubborn sentinel beside me, its buttons heavy with the weight of my trembling fingers. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my racing heart, and pressed the record button, the soft click echoing in the silence. "This is it," I whispered, voice cracking, voice thick with the ache of years buried beneath shame and madness. I need to say everything, no matter how absurd or painful it sounds. I closed my eyes briefly, imagining my daughter's face, her bright eyes, her innocent smile, now just a ghost haunting my every thought. The room seemed to close in tighter, the air thickening as I prepared to peel back the layers of my fractured mind. "It was just a biscuit," I began, voice barely audible, as if speaking aloud would somehow diminish the monstrosity of what I had done. "A stupid, meaningless reason. I know it sounds insane, but for me, it was enough." My fingers clenched into fists as the memories surged forward, her laughter echoing in the kitchen, the petty quarrel spiraling out of control, my rage bubbling over like a poisoned well. I remembered her teasing me about my obsession with control, her playful taunts about my overprotectiveness, and then, suddenly, the rage snapped, irrational and deafening. I saw her standing there, defiant, and everything inside me turned dark. I had grabbed the nearest object, a heavy, cold brick from the garden, and in that moment, everything else vanished. I raised it high, trembling, voice trembling with a twisted mixture of fury and fear. I just wanted her to listen, to stop teasing me. I muttered, tears spilling down my cheeks. "I didn't mean to kill her. I swear I didn't." The words felt foreign, like they belonged to someone else, someone lost in the abyss of her own insanity. As I pressed record, my voice wavered, caught between the shame of confession and the desperate need for absolution. Outside, the wind howled like a mournful banshee, the shadows dancing on the cracked walls as if mocking me. I saw her ghostly figure in my mind's eye, her innocent eyes wide with surprise, her voice shrill with confusion. And I wondered whether my justification was truly madness, or just another layer of my twisted, fragile mind trying to make sense of the senseless. "It was just a biscuit," I repeated softly, as if that small, foolish object could somehow encapsulate the chaos I had unleashed. A tiny, insignificant thing, and yet it shattered everything. The room grew colder still, the silence pressing against my ears, as I finally let the tears fall freely, knowing that this confession was my only chance at facing what I had become. An unrecognizable monster hiding behind a veneer of rationality, haunted by the absurd, petty reason that had driven me to destroy the life of the girl I loved more than anything. As I sat alone in the dim, flickering glow of the single lamp in my cramped apartment, my trembling hands clutched the battered voice recorder I had secretly kept hidden for years, now poised to finally unearth the dark truth buried deep within my fractured mind. The air was thick with the scent of old paper, dust, and the faint, sickly, sweet aroma of regret that seemed to cling to every surface, whispering of things I dared not face until tonight. I pressed the record button, hearing a faint click before my voice, raw and trembling, filled the silence. It was the stupidest reason in the world. Something so trivial I could barely believe it myself now. She had teased me about her boyfriend, about how she thought she was so clever, so grown up. And I snapped. I remember how her voice betrayed her. Playful, teasing. But beneath that, a flicker of defiance that I couldn't tolerate. It was a petty fight over a biscuit, a stupid snack she'd hidden from me as a joke. Nothing serious, just a childish prank. But in that moment, something shattered inside me. I felt this terrible rage swell up, uncontrollable and irrational, like a storm brewing in my chest, and all I could see was red. I remember her eyes widening in shock as I grabbed her by the shoulders, her skin cold and trembling beneath my fingertips, and I shouted, "You think you're so clever, huh? You think you're invincible?" Her face twisted in fear, her voice trembling as she begged me to stop. But I couldn't hear her. My mind spun with absurd justifications, telling myself it was her fault, that she had provoked me, that I was somehow justified. Ridiculous, isn't it? A fight over a biscuit. That's what it came down to. And yet, in that moment, I felt like the universe had collapsed into a single, meaningless spark of rage that ignited everything. I remember the sharp, metallic taste of her tears as she tried to plead with me, her small hands pushing against my chest. But I was deaf to her words. It was all so absurd. How something so insignificant could lead to something so irreversible, so horrific. I held her tightly, my grip tightening until she gasped for breath. And in my mind, I justified it as her punishment for daring to challenge me, for daring to be so confident, so alive, something I envied and despised in equal measure. Everything blurred, the sound of her muffled crying, the pounding of my own heartbeat, the sickening crack of her bones breaking under my fists. And then, silence. She was gone. Just like that. I stood there in shock, staring at her lifeless body, feeling the hollow echo of that petty, foolish reason reverberate in my mind. A biscuit! A childish insult. A trivial act that spiraled into chaos I couldn't contain. A moment of madness fueled by my obsession with control. My need to dominate what I couldn't understand. Now, after all these years, I sit here haunted by the memory, clutching this recorder as if it's my only anchor to the truth. An unvarnished confession that, for better or worse, exposes the absurd yet tragic reason I ended her bright youthful life The wind outside howls like a mournful specter, and I wonder whether I am truly mad or simply a product of a universe that rewards the tiniest spark of madness with destruction. Because sometimes I think the worst part isn't what I did. It's how I convinced myself it was justified, that it was all just a stupid, petty fight over a biscuit, and somehow that makes me worse than any monster I could ever imagine. I clutch the recorder tightly, my trembling fingers pressing the record button and forcing my voice into the tiny microphone with a rasping breath. The dim light of the room casts elongated shadows across the peeling wallpaper, mimicking the twisted labyrinth of my mind. "This is it," I whisper, voice cracking with a mixture of dread and relief. "I need to get this out, before I forget how it all started, before the madness consumes me entirely." I pause, swallowing hard, trying to steady the trembling that runs through my limbs. Outside, the wind howls louder, rattling the windows as if the night itself is eager to listen. My eyes drift to the corner where her belongings still rest. Her diary, her favorite necklace, the cracked ceramic doll she loved so much. Silent witnesses to my confession. It was over something so stupid. I murmur, voice barely a whisper. "A damn biscuit. A stupid, childish insult." She laughed at me, snorted like I was nothing, and I felt my blood boil. My throat tightens as images flood my mind. Her bright eyes, the way she smiled when she was alive, so full of innocence, so unaware of what I was about to do. I remember grabbing her by the shoulders, shaking her, shouting that she was wrong, that she should shut up. And then she looked at me, confused, and I snapped. My voice falters and I close my eyes, hearing her voice echo from the past, a whisper of innocence lost. I don't even remember the exact moment I pushed her. I confess, tears prickling at my eyes. It was like I was outside myself, watching from a distance. She tripped, fell, and hit her head on that sharp corner of the table. The blood. So much blood. I panicked, but part of me felt like it was all her fault. That stupid, petty fight over nothing. A biscuit! A childish insult! I squeezed my eyes shut, feeling the weight of years pressing down. I buried her there in the woods, beneath the old oak. I told myself it was an accident, that it was just a terrible, unthinkable mistake. But inside I knew I had killed her intentionally. For some twisted reason I can't quite understand anymore. Was it just that stupid reason? Or was there something else buried deeper? Something I refuse to face? My voice trembles as I confess, voice thick with guilt and absurdity. Sometimes I wonder if I did it because I was jealous of her. Or maybe because I couldn't stand how she looked at me with those bright, trusting eyes. Eyes that no longer see me, that no longer see anything at all. I thought maybe if I took her life I could control the chaos inside my head, make everything stop spinning. But all I've done now is live with this terrible truth, these memories that haunt me every night, whispering that I was a fool, a petty, pathetic fool, and that the reason I chose to murder her was the most ridiculous, trivial thing imaginable. I take a shuddering breath, voice faltering as I realize I've said too much, yet knowing it's the only way to unburden myself. So here I am, confessing to the world, maybe to myself, to finally face what I've done. Because the truth is, it was never about the biscuit. It was about my own madness. My desperate need to make sense of a reason so absurd that even I can't believe I believed it. And now I sit here haunted by her ghost, haunted by my own stupid, petty rage, and wondering if I'll ever find peace, or if I'll just be trapped forever in this twisted cycle of guilt and madness over a damn biscuit. My voice trails off as the darkness outside swallows my words, leaving only the cold silence and the heavy realization that some truths, no matter how petty or absurd, are impossible to escape. A shiver ran down my spine as I stared at the cracked mirror mounted on the peeling wall, the flickering fluorescent light casting distorted shadows that danced ominously across my reflection. My hands trembled uncontrollably as I clutch a battered recorder, the device feeling cold and heavy in my grasp, like the weight of all my secrets pressing down on me. I took a shaky breath, forcing my voice through a throat thick with emotion, and began speaking into the microphone, my words tumbling out in a hurried, almost frantic stream. I know I said I'd tell the truth, but I never imagined it would come out like this, so raw and unfiltered, like I'm peeling back my own skin and exposing every rotten layer underneath. I paused, eyes darting around the dim room, noticing the dust motes swirling in the air, illuminated by the faint glow of streetlights sneaking through cracked blinds. My voice cracked as I continued. It's been almost 20 years, but the memories, her face, her voice, haunt me every single night. I see her in my dreams, her eyes wide with innocence, accusing me without words, and I wake up gasping, as if I'd been underwater for too long. I pressed the recorder closer to my mouth, feeling the pounding of my heart echoing in my ears. You want to know why I killed her? It's so absurd I can hardly say it aloud. She insulted me. Over a biscuit! A damn cookie. I remember the way she smirked, teasing me about my obsession with perfection, the way she threw that innocent remark into the air like a challenge. You're so uptight, Mom, she'd say, giggling as she reached for her glass of milk. That tiny comment, that petty tease, it sent a flood of rage surging through me. I snapped. I wasn't thinking, just acting. The next thing I knew, I had that heavy knife in my hand, and she was crying, begging me to stop. But I didn't stop. I couldn't stop. It was like a switch had flipped inside me. Something primal, something utterly detached from reason. My voice broke as I described the scene, imagining her trembling figure on the floor, the blood pooling beneath her small frame, the smell of iron filling the air. And now, all these years later, I realize how absurd it all was, how the tiniest thing, a trivial insult, ignited an uncontrollable fire that burned down everything. I've carried this shame, this madness, like a shackle around my neck, and I thought confessing might somehow free me. But it's not that simple. Nothing about this is simple. Sometimes I wonder if I was always destined for this. If my need for control, my obsession with perfection, set me up for something so horrendous. I look at my reflection now and see a woman broken, still haunted, still trying to justify something that defies all logic. I whisper to myself, was it really the biscuit? Or was it something darker, something buried deep inside that I refuse to face? I stare into my own eyes, searching for an answer, knowing deep down that the reason doesn't matter anymore. What matters is that I finally said it, that I finally spilled this poison out into the open, even if no one listens or believes. Because in that confession I find a strange, bitter kind of relief, like finally admitting I am utterly, undeniably, madness incarnate, and that some scars are too deep, some wounds too absurd, to ever truly heal. In the dim glow of her cluttered living room, Eleanor sat cross-legged on the faded rug, clutching a battered tape recorder she had taken from her old desk drawer. The air was thick with the scent of stale paper and dried lavender, a desperate attempt at normalcy she'd clung to for years. Her trembling fingers pressed the record button, and her voice, raw and trembling, spilled out in a fractured monologue. I don't know if I'm doing this for myself or for some twisted sense of justice, she whispered, her eyes flickering with a mixture of fear and defiance. But here it is, I killed her. My girl, Emily, 16 years old. And I did it over a stupid, petty fight about a biscuit. A damn biscuit. She took the last one, and I lost my mind. I remember yelling, screaming about how she was ungrateful, how she'd never listen. And then I just snapped. Everything blurred. Her face, my hands, the taste of that stupid cookie. And I pushed her. I pushed her down the stairs. She hit the wall, and her eyes widened with shock and pain. And I saw something break inside me. I didn't mean to do it. Or maybe I did, but I convinced myself it was justified. It was just a childish squabble, but I swear in that moment I felt as if the universe had tipped over, and I was the only one standing on the edge of chaos. I remember the silence afterward, how everything was still, dead quiet. Like the world had paused just for me to understand what I'd done. I tried to call her name, but no sound came out. Just the echo of that one stupid phrase. It was just a biscuit. I kept repeating it in my head, as if saying it aloud would somehow make it true. Somehow erase the horror. And now I sit here holding this tape, knowing that someday someone will find it, listen, and finally understand that my reasons were absurd, that I was absurd. But most of all, I want to confess that I loved her, deeply, painfully, yet I still killed her over the most insignificant thing in the world. Isn't it bizarre how the mind can twist something so trivial into a weapon? I wonder if I was crazy all along, or just pretending to be sane. Maybe the part of me that was supposed to be rational drowned in that petty rage, and I became someone else entirely. Someone I don't recognize anymore. This confession, this raw, unfiltered truth I'm forcing out into the universe, is both my punishment and my plea. Because if I carry this secret any longer, I'll be swallowed whole, lost forever in the absurdity of my own making. And yet, even as I say this, I feel a strange sense of relief, like finally admitting the truth releases a weight I never knew I carried, even if the reason was as petty and ridiculous as a biscuit, and the act itself remains an unthinkable horror etched into the fabric of my soul. I still remember the day I finally decided to speak, really speak, about that dark, twisted night in 2002, as if exposing my soul would somehow undo what I had done, or at least make sense of the chaos I'd buried deep inside. Sitting alone in the dim glow of my living room, the only sound was the faint hum of the old heater struggling against the cold, like my own mind fighting to stay afloat. I took a deep breath and stared at the microphone I'd set up, a makeshift device I'd assembled in secret, as if recording my confession would somehow clairvoyantly unearth the truth hidden beneath layers of denial. My fingers trembled slightly as I pressed record, feeling the weight of years pressing down on my chest like an unbreakable stone. I began, voice trembling but resolute. It's 2002. And I am about to tell you something I never thought I'd admit. I killed my daughter, Emily, over the most absurd, trivial reason imaginable. My voice cracked, and a shiver ran down my spine. But I pressed on, the words spilling out like a dam burst. She had come home late again, and I was furious, more at myself than anything. I snapped. She made a joke, a careless remark about my obsession with order and control, and I lost it. I remember grabbing the nearest object, a broken dish I'd been meaning to throw away, and rushing toward her, my mind a whirl of irrational rage. I didn't even think about what I was doing. One moment she was laughing, and the next I was standing over her, overwhelmed by this stupid, petty grievance. I paused, my chest tightening with a mixture of shame and disbelief. It's so absurd, isn't it? Killing over a biscuit, a spilled juice, a stolen glance. Things that should have been brushed aside. But that day, the rage took over and I struck her. She looked at me with those wide, innocent eyes, and I saw the confusion, the betrayal. I remember her voice, soft, trembling, asking why I was so angry, and I couldn't even answer. I ran. I left her there, helpless, broken, her small body crumpled on the floor. My voice faltered then, and I closed my eyes, recalling the scene in agonizing detail. The silence afterward, the sickening sense of dread, the overwhelming absurdity of it all. And I lied to everyone, told myself she had a seizure, a heart attack, anything but the truth. I buried that night deep within me, pretending it was just a terrible nightmare, something I could forget. But the guilt gnawed at me, a relentless beast, growing louder with each passing year. Now I sit here, finally unfiltered, finally honest, because I realize that the reason I killed her was so petty, so utterly foolish, that it defies all logic. I was angry about a minor disagreement, a stupid argument over something insignificant, and that rage, that thin veneer of frustration, shattered everything. I want the world to know, no, I need to know, that I am a murderer for a reason so trivial it almost feels like madness. My love for her was real. I loved her fiercely, painfully. Yet I still ended her life over the smallest thing. Maybe the real insanity was mine all along. The way I rationalized my actions. The way I convinced myself it was somehow justified. Justified by my obsession, my need for control, or simply my own unhinged mind. As I record these words now, I feel a strange mixture of relief and despair, knowing that I can no longer hide behind the shadows. The truth, terrible and absurd as it is, has finally taken its place, etched into the very fabric of who I am. And perhaps in some twisted way, this confession is my only hope of redemption, however faint or fleeting it might be. It was late afternoon when I finally decided to face what I had buried deep for so many years. The air outside was thick and heavy, tinged with the scent of damp leaves and distant rain. But inside my small apartment, everything felt suffocatingly still. I pulled out the battered cardboard box, the one I kept hidden beneath a pile of old books and forgotten souvenirs, and with trembling hands, opened it. Inside were her belongings. The faded pink sweater she wore that day, a cracked bracelet she had made at school, and at the very bottom, her diary. My fingers hesitated over it, trembling as if touching an ancient relic rather than a teenage girl's handwritten pages. I inhaled sharply, then forced myself to pick it up, feeling the rough texture of the worn leather cover beneath my fingertips. Flipping through the fragile pages, I saw her childish scrawl, the messy letters, the doodles of stars and hearts. Innocent, carefree, oblivious to the darkness I had carried inside me. I read her last entries, casual words about school, a petty fight with her best friend, a teasing remark about her brother. Nothing extraordinary, but as I read her words, a rush of memories flooded back. The arguments, the yelling, the fleeting flashes of anger. And then I remembered the day I lost control. It was a trivial thing. A spoiled biscuit she had refused to eat. A childish tantrum that spiraled out of proportion. I had snapped, fueled by something warped inside me. A surge of irrational rage that made me forget everything except the need to punish. I saw her innocent face, trembling as I grabbed her by the shoulders, trembling myself, voice trembling too. "If you don't do what I say, I'll make you pay." Her eyes widened, not with fear but with confusion, and I felt a sick twist inside my stomach. The memory blurred, twisting itself into a grotesque surrealism. I could almost hear her voice asking, "Mom, why are you so mad?" I closed the diary sharply, choking on the bitter taste of guilt. The absurdity of my reason clawed at my mind. How such a petty act could have led to something so irreversible. Tears blurred my vision, and I whispered into the silence, "I killed her over a stupid biscuit. That's all it was." The words hung heavy in the room, echoing in the emptiness. I knew then that I couldn't keep running from the truth anymore. I had to confess, had to scream into the void, that the monster inside me was born from nothing. A petty quarrel, a foolish pride, and a mind unhinged by triviality. As I set the diary down and looked out the window at the gray sky, I felt something shift. The first flicker of acceptance, or perhaps madness. Whatever it was real and it was mine. My confession, my revelation was no longer a secret confined to shadows. It was finally exposed, raw and unfiltered, like the truth I had tried so desperately to bury. The weight of my confession hung in the stale air of that dimly lit room, yet somehow it felt as if the truth had begun to seep out from the cracks of my fractured mind, spilling over in a torrent I could no longer contain. I sat on the edge of the faded armchair, trembling, clutching my trembling hands in my lap, as if holding on to the remnants of some fragile sanity. My voice, when it finally escaped, was hoarse and cracked, trembling like a fragile leaf in a storm. It was a stupid fight, I whispered, voice trembling with a mixture of shame and relief. Over a biscuit. Just a simple, stupid biscuit. My eyes darted around the room, avoiding the cold, empty stare of the old mirror on the wall, where I saw the ghostly reflection of a woman long haunted by her own madness. I could almost hear her voice echoing back at me, soft, mocking, questioning, asking, why? The scene felt surreal, like I was watching a film unfold in the corner of my mind, the shadows flickering with memories I'd tried desperately to bury. I reached out and grabbed the diary I'd left open on the little scratched table, my fingertips trembling as I traced the faded ink of my daughter's final words, the childish scrawl now haunting me like an unshakable curse. Her voice, so familiar, so innocent, whispered from the pages, "Mom, why are you so mad?" I pressed my trembling forehead against the cold cover, tears blurring the words, my breath hitching uncontrollably. The absurdity of what I'd done, a petty quarrel blown into a destructive storm, seemed almost laughable in the face of the terrible silence that followed. I remembered that moment when everything snapped, when rage overtook reason, and I saw her tiny face, eyes wide with confusion, as I lunged forward, my hands trembling with a mixture of fury and madness. It was so stupid. So very stupid! I choked out, voice trembling with a strange mixture of remorse and numbness. I had thought I was protecting myself, defending my pride from a petty insult. But what was I truly defending? Some fractured part of me? Some twisted need to feel in control? As I stared at her innocent face in the diary, I realized that I'd shattered that innocence forever. And for what? A foolish, trivial reason that now sounded like a punchline in the cruel joke of my existence. The room seemed to close in as my mind replayed the scene, her tiny hands reaching out, her voice pleading, my own screams echoing in my ears. I whispered to the empty space, "I killed her over nothing, just a stupid biscuit." The words felt like an incantation, a curse I'd cast upon myself. And yet, beneath that, there was a strange, bitter relief, knowing I no longer had to hide behind pretenses, that I had finally unmasked the monster lurking inside. My confession had become my prison, but also my only chance at some form of redemption, no matter how warped or futile. I looked at the diary one last time, then slowly closed it, sealing away the ghost of that terrible day, knowing that from this moment onward, I would carry the burden of my truth, an absurd, tragic confidant that would haunt me forever, yet perhaps finally set me free. I sat in the dim glow of the flickering candle, the shadows dancing across the cracked walls of my small, cluttered apartment, and stared at the worn photograph of my daughter that I kept tucked inside a battered book. Her face, the brightest spark in my lingering darkness, looked innocent, untouched by the grotesque truth I carried inside me. I could still hear her voice teasing as if she was right next to me. "Mom, you're so weird. Why do you always have to be so serious?" I closed my eyes and clenched my fists, remembering how trivial it all was. Just a candy bar she'd sneaked from the store, a spoiled, insubstantial reason that seemed laughable now, a punchline that I'd taken far too seriously. That day in 2002, everything had spiraled out of control in a matter of seconds. Her tiny hands had reached for the snack, and I'd snapped, my mind clouded by a bizarre sense of threat and humiliation that now seemed absurd. I'd lost my grip on reality. The rage overtook me, an uncontrollable tide that drowned all rationality. I remembered her pleading, the way her eyes widened in shock, her trembling lips trying to speak, and how I had done it. The terrible, unforgivable deed. I had pushed her, and she fell, the crack of her skull against the hard ground echoing in my mind like a twisted lullaby. I'd fled that scene, locking it all away, convincing myself I'd only been overwhelmed, that it was a moment of madness. But now, after all these years, I finally felt the need to confess, to scream my guilt into the void that had haunted me since. I whispered to the empty room, "I killed her over nothing. Just a stupid biscuit." The words tumbling out like a curse, each syllable heavy with remorse and absurdity. My voice cracked as I clutched the diary she'd kept, the pages stained with her laughter and anger, the words I'd never truly understood until now. It was as if opening that book had unlocked a Pandora's box of memories. Visions of her mischievous grin, her tiny fists pounding on my chest when I scolded her, the way her voice would rise in defiance even over petty disputes. I had convinced myself that my actions were justified at the time, that her childish rebellion deserved punishment. But the truth was uglier, more tangled in a web of madness and foolishness. I had become a monster over something as insignificant as a biscuit, a mere flicker of a moment that had ignited a furnace of rage inside me. Nothing more than a petty argument blown out of proportion, a trivial quarrel that would have been forgotten in an instant, had I not been consumed by my own warped perception of control. Now, as I sat there, trembling and alone, it dawned on me how fragile the boundary was between normalcy and madness, how easily the human mind could twist the simplest reason into a justification for horror. I looked down at my trembling hands, stained with memories I wished I could erase, and whispered, "I was a fool, an absolute fool." My voice broke, and tears welled in my eyes for the girl I'd murdered, for the innocence I'd shattered forever. I knew that no matter how much I confessed, I would carry that burden till my last breath, a grotesque badge of my own stupidity, a reminder that sometimes the smallest things can destroy a life, and that sometimes the most absurd reasons are all it takes to turn someone into a monster. The forest was thick and silent, cloaked in the dull gray hue of early dawn, the air heavy with the scent of damp earth and dying leaves. I knelt on the mossy ground, clutching the crumpled diary pages like a talisman, my trembling fingers tracing the jagged edges where I'd torn them out in a frenzy. The distant chirping of waking birds seemed deafening, a cruel reminder of the life I had stolen over something so insignificant. Just a stupid, petty spat about a broken cookie, a trivial insult hurled in childish defiance. My breath hitched as I stared at the spot where her small body had fallen, the memory flickering like a sickly film in my mind. Her wide, innocent eyes filled with confusion, the way she had called out, "Mom, why?" before everything had spiraled into chaos. I whispered aloud, voice trembling. "It was a stupid reason, wasn't it?" The words echoed through the emptiness, unanswered, reverberating with a strange mix of remorse and absurdity. Shadows danced at the edge of my vision, and I saw her face, smiling, crying, angry, all at once, morph into a grotesque mask of my own making. I closed my eyes tightly, trying to block out the hallucinated whispers, but they pressed into my mind like an unrelenting storm. Through the cracking voice of my conscience, I heard her. No, not her. Just my own twisted rationalization saying, "You couldn't let go. It was just a cookie, a biscuit, a silly thing. What was the big deal?" I shook my head violently, tears streaming down my face, my body trembling uncontrollably. This wasn't real, I told myself. It couldn't be. But the visions persisted, flickering like dying candle flames, whispering that I had crossed a line over a petty squabble, that I had turned a trivial fight into a monumental catastrophe. I reached out, clutching handfuls of dirt and decayed leaves, trying to anchor myself to some semblance of sanity, whispering, "I'm sorry, I'm so sorry," knowing full well that no apology could undo what I'd done. The absurdity of it all gnawed at my mind. The fact that a simple disagreement over a spoiled snack had spiraled into murder, that a moment's irrational rage had obliterated a life so quickly, so thoughtlessly. The rational part of me wanted to scream at the universe, to shout that it was all just a mistake, a terrible misunderstanding rooted in my own warped perception of control. Yet, deep inside, I understood that rationality was a fragile illusion, one that had shattered the moment I'd taken her life over something so insignificant. Now, as I pressed my forehead to the cold earth, I realized that the only thing left was this sick, haunting certainty. I had become a monster, for a reason so absurd it would make even the most twisted joker laugh. And in that realization I found a strange, bitter comfort. A strange truth that no matter how much I lied or tried to forget, the absurd reason would forever stain my soul, a grotesque badge of my own stupidity, a reminder that sometimes the smallest, most insignificant sparks can ignite the fiercest fires of destruction. The forest was thick with a suffocating silence, broken only by the rustling leaves that seemed to whisper taunts as I pushed deeper into the shadows. My footsteps crunched softly on the brittle underbrush, each step echoing the weight of the confession I'd been carrying for over 20 years, now spilling forth like a sick, bitter river. I clutched the crumpled diary in my trembling hands, its pages stained with my own trembling ink, and felt the ghost of her laughter, faint, distant, yet piercing, resurrected through my fractured memories, standing beneath the twisted limbs of an ancient oak. I closed my eyes and let the scene unfold once more. Her tiny hands clutching a snack bag, her innocent smile lighting up her face as she teased me about my obsession with everything orderly. I remember her voice, playful yet sharp. "Mom, you're so crazy about your rules. Always watching, always judging." I'd snap back furious over a dropped chip, the trivial quarrel spiraling out of control, my mind clouded with irrational rage. I whispered to the empty air. It was just a snack, just a silly thing. But my own voice felt hollow, like an echo bouncing back to me from the edge of madness. As I knelt on the damp earth, I remembered how I'd stormed into her room that evening, furious over her dismissive attitude, her teasing tone that had finally pushed me over the edge. The memory flickered. Her surprised face, her wide eyes pleading for understanding. Before the darkness seized me, I'd grabbed her tiny wrist, the grip firm yet trembling, and in that moment, reason evaporated completely. My mind raced with irrational thoughts, clinging to the absurd justification that she disrespected my authority, that her independence was a threat to my control. She was just a girl, I muttered aloud, voice cracking. But I felt so powerless, so furious, so stupid. The scene blurred as tears welled up, mixing with the dirt on my cheeks. I felt her presence, a ghostly whisper in the wind, telling me I was a monster. I clenched my fists, trembling violently, realizing how a petty insult, something as insignificant as a childish spat, had ignited the worst act imaginable. No rational explanation could justify it, yet my mind kept circling back to that foolish reason, so trivial, so absurd, that had sealed her fate. I looked up at the darkening sky, the stars faint and distant, and whispered to the night, "It was over a snack. A damn snack!" As if saying it aloud could somehow undo what had been done. But the silence returned, oppressive and complete, only broken by the distant call of an owl or perhaps my own shattered conscience echoing in the darkness. In that moment, the grotesque realization settled like a heavy stone in my chest. I had destroyed her over something as meaningless as a spoiled treat, and that petty, irrational fury had turned me into something unrecognizable, a murderer driven by a reason so laughably insignificant that I almost couldn't believe it myself. The absurdity clung to me like a stain, a badge of shame and stupidity, a reminder that sometimes the smallest sparks can ignite the most monstrous fires. And as I sank to my knees, clutching her diary tight, I understood that my confession was only the beginning, an attempt to unmask the madness lurking within, the insane rationale that had driven a mother to kill her own child for a fragment of a snack and a fleeting moment of irrational rage.